My name is Ron. My question is aimed at those who want to redefine marriage. Why limit marriage to two people? Why not expand marriage to more people?
Do you want to start with that? Is polygamy a risk of opening up gay marriage?
No, it's not. Look, I think, what I find very frustrating about this debate is nobody actually explains why they're opposed to marriage equality. Instead, they just throw up all these other issues they're concerned about, like IVF, surrogacy, or polygamy. Deal with them when they arise, or explain the link between same-sex marriage and polygamy. Why does one inexorably lead to the other? You hear this argument that, well, if we allow gays to marry, the next thing you know, people are going to be marrying their dogs. In the same way that, when we decriminalised homosexuality, we suddenly decriminalised bestiality. We didn't do it. There's no link between the two things. There are good policy reasons why I think we're unlikely to see polyamorous relationships ever permitted to obtain the legal status of marriage. The Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which is the UN's peak body on gender rights, has unequivocally said a number of times that one of the reasons why they believe states should not legalise polyamorous relationships as marriages is because more often than not, what you see is polygyny, that is one man marrying multiple women. And it actually is used as a guise for psychological, financial and even physical abuse. Not in all relationships, but in many of them. And there is a real concern that if you permit those relationships to obtain the legal status of marriage, that's something that the state can be condoning. Now, I don't know enough about the issue. The point, and I suspect respectfully that you may not either, but the point is this: if your objection is with those relationships, deal with them when they arise. The idea that there's this slippery slope from one to the other is absurd. I mean, when miscegenation laws were overturned in the United States in 1967, you didn't see a sudden spate of polygamy throughout the United States. Why should it be the case for same-sex marriage?
Thanks, Bateman. I'll just throw it down.
Was just he posed a challenge to Albie to explain the relationship between, so I just respond, just to keep it on topic. Well, I'd like to answer that. Now, I think that it was often characterised as a slippery slope argument. So the idea is that if we allow same-sex marriage, then the likely consequence is that polyamory is going to come along, polygamy, polyandry, all these sorts of different relationships. People start marrying their animals. That's the way it's often characterised. It's a sort of a scare tactic. It's a sort of scaremongering, just sort of a red herring to get away from the real and the central issue, which is here, which is supposedly marriage equality. I don't think there's anything wrong with a slippery slope argument, if by slippery slope you mean arguing for the sort of looking at predictable consequences of a certain action. I'm not going to make a slippery slope argument. The way it often is expressed is not as a slippery slope argument. It's expressed as whatever happens, this argument works. And it goes like this: that if marriage is understood to be an emotional union, meaning marriage is not understood as a bodily union with a natural and inherent orientation of children, which is something that only a man and a woman can form, which is a principled reason why it's only possible between two, then what reason in an emotional union itself gives the restrictions to only two people? What is it about emotional unions themselves that they should be permanent or exclusive to two, or monogamous? Now that holds, whatever the case, it doesn't even matter whether people are arguing for polyamorous unions or polygamous ones, even though they are here in Sydney. And they are certainly in Canada, certainly in the US with over 500,000 polyamorous households. But this argument works whatever the case, however far down the line. What reason in principle, not just no one's arguing for it now, it's just scaremongering, scare tactics, or diversionary answers. I want to hear the reason on your side why marriage is only possible between two people. Now you said that we'll deal with that down later, and that's the same answer that Justice Michael Kirby gave in the Senate committee hearings. But everyone knows that it doesn't take very long for these issues to come up. All you need is one person to challenge it, a good-looking couple, get a TV, put the spotlight on them, and all of a sudden everyone realizes, maybe this is the case. And I think it's unfair, if marriage is understood to be an emotional union, I think it is unfair not to recognise unions of 3 or 4 or more people, because it is actually going against the principle of equality. If marriage is understood to be an emotional union, then why would you violate the justice and equality of people who can form those same sorts of unions, which are 3 or 4 people?
Thanks, Pat.
Just one small point there, because James acknowledged that he didn't know much about the legal implications of this. One person who does understand the legal implications of the so-called slippery slope is Lord Daniel Brennan. He was former chair of the Bar Association in the UK. And he was writing in March this year and I quote, "After all, if you can abolish the most important precondition of marriage, namely that it requires a person of each sex, why should you be able to retain other preconditions, such as limiting it to only 2 people? In the Netherlands, where same-sex marriage was introduced in 2001, cohabitation agreements have been used already to give 3-way relationships a measure of legal recognition," end quote. So it's not a slippery slope as much as an extension of logic. Because if we are trying to defend the equality of love, the equal commitment and sincerity between consenting adults, then anyone here, tell me on what rock of principle, on what principle can you deny 3 equally serious, committed, loving people to express their love, publicly acknowledged in a 3-way marriage? Show me your principle, please.
Well,
I'll have a response from Pat.
I actually gave a principle in my answer, which was that the United Nations has repeatedly said that polygamous relationships can be used as guises for the abuse of women. That's a very powerful, good reason not to permit these kind of relationships to be recognised
What about
as marriages.
polyamorous ones?
3 men. 3 men, no women involved.
Which are extremely rare.
May I quote James Dominguez of Bisexual Alliance Victoria, right, telling The Australian in May this year, sometime in the distant future, we should look at the idea of plural marriage.
Can I also point out to you that there's no reason, even according to your principle, why these relationships should not be permitted. They're also capable of producing children. They're also capable of permanence. So what exactly is your objection to these relationships?
The principled reason why the traditional view is only able to be formed by a man and a woman is that only a man and a woman can form a reproductive type act.
A man with many women can reproduce many, many times, even more so, right?
And every child born to that man and his harem of women will have a mother and a father. QID.
Cool, I think we'll cut it there. We'll go to the question from the gentleman in the audience here. You'll have to speak up, we can't get it.
I think the definition of marriage as an emotional union is a very immature definition of marriage, and the precondition for marriage is actually love, and not necessarily that the 2 partners are separate, are different genders. I would first like to address Frank Brennan's comments. Frank Brennan, like yourself, seems to be ignorant of the fact that in Australia, marriage is a federal law, and concerns with children under family law in the federal sphere, and adoption and surrogacy state laws. So we're only talking about here a federal law. And the fact is that many same-sex couples have children either from previous marriages or from other sources, and they are those children are entitled to the same protections of the law as anyone else. And from a practical point of view, love trumps biology, both from a theological point of view as well as from a psychological point of view. And there are many same-sex couples who are married, who are in a lifelong commitment to each other. It's simply not recognised by church or state. That doesn't mean that it's invalid.
The gentleman have a question.
No.
I think you said that you didn't think the emotional union way of describing marriage was an appropriate way. What I think my challenge in my talk was even if people don't like the idea of that way of characterising it, provide me with a definition of marriage that grounds, that justifies norms of exclusivity, permanence, monogamy, and explains why the state has an interest in regulating it. And the idea that marriage is just a loving, consensual bond doesn't of itself provide those norms. In fact, it doesn't even make sense. When you think about it, the most sort of intimate and private friendships that we have, the most deeper sort of friendships that we have, aren't regulated by the government, right? If you want to make a friend, you don't have to sign a contract. If someone stands you up at the movies, you're not going to sue them. Why does the state or the government have no interest in private or personal friendships? Because many sorts of relationships don't bear on the common good in a significant way that justifies regulation. But there is a reason why a particular sort of union, the union between a man and woman, does. Now, why is that? What explains the difference why the state is interested in that and something else? Well, I think because these sorts of unions, whatever the value of other sorts of unions are, have a special and direct relationship to the common good because they, the unions of themselves, bring about kids. Now, the bring about kids thing is important. It's been getting a lot of discussion here. I don't want people to assume that marriage is just about baby making, or that somehow marriage is purely instrumentally valuable because it produces kids. Okay? That's why the law has long recognised why couples who are infertile or old can get married. Now, why is that the case? Because infertile couples and older couples can still form the unique union that a man and woman can. And that's a comprehensive union, not just a union of minds and hearts, but a union that is extended alongst the bodily dimension. Now, it's described in religious traditions as a one-flesh union, as that sort of thing, but people who are outside of religious traditions can understand the special significance of the unity that is only possible between performing an act. You need two people to do it. You can't do that with two people of the same sex, let alone 3 or 4. And the problem with characterising marriage as an emotional union, if you don't like that, is that I still haven't found yet anything from the other side that justifies those features, except for sort of just a cultural sort of, well, that's just what we all take it to believe. You know, marriage just is between two people. And no one's arguing for that, but that's the thing. So provide us with another alternative definition that can make sense of the core features of marriage that both of us, I think are important.
Thanks, Pat. I think the lady over here is about to explode, so would you like to go, Sarah?
I'm a lesbian. I'm one of the communities that these people over here on the left are trying to deny our civil rights. I'm also someone who engages in a very loving union with my lover, a girlfriend, and it's very fulfilling. And I would, at some point, like to get married to her if the relationship goes well. But these people over here seem to have lost their humanity. Because, as the speakers outlined on the right, who are pro-marriage equality, we have queer youth killing themselves at a rate astronomically higher than their straight counterparts because of the homophobia that these people on the left elucidate on a regular basis. They're trying to say to us that we're abnormal and that we don't deserve the same rights. My question to you is, did your organisations, did your churches deny Aboriginal people the right to marry white people in the 50s and 60s? My question to you is, did your organisations deny no-fault divorce? And did your organisations campaign against recognising rape to be happening in marriage? Did your organisations do that? Or is it just homosexuals that you're obsessed about? And my question to this crew over here is, we're on the way to winning marriage equality. How are we going to get there faster?
One question on the next, but I think Pat deserves a right to reply, and so do you, Dr. Bangan.
Thanks, Ray. Again, it comes back to, you talked about the race issue. That was a division based on racism and trying to keep races apart. It wasn't about marriage, it was about keeping races apart. But the whole point of marriage is that it's nothing to do with race, it's to do with male and female. That's why it was such an injustice. But when you have, as you say, 2 women who want to have a baby, yes, you can do it with technology, or you can, you know, the problem is that is deliberately denying a child his birthright to a father. And it's simply saying, and you may think it's the case, that a father simply doesn't matter to a child. That you can deliberately set up a situation where a child cannot have a dad. I just disagree with you. I think a dad does matter to a child, and it's not for us adults to deny them that deep relationship. No. Now you have equal rights to your relationship and equal rights. There is no civic right that is denied same-sex couples in Australia except marriage. And when even Justice Michael Kirby was asked this at the Senate inquiry, he couldn't identify any discrimination against same-sex couples that remains in Australia. There is none. All we have is marriage, and the reason why marriage must stay between a man and a woman is that there is a far greater discrimination at stake, and that is discriminating against those children who will be created in the knowledge that they will have to miss out on their mother or father. You've got to choose between one or other discrimination.
I think sometimes it's simply assumed that this view is somehow a sort of uniquely Catholic or Christian or theistic sort of view of marriage, and that we're trying to impose some religiously oriented view of what marriage is onto the rest of the world. But I think just a quick look at sort of the cross-cultural understanding of this institution shows that this view, this idea of marriage as being what's called a conjugal union, a comprehensive, sort of one that all-encompassing, uniting the bodies as well as the minds, oriented towards children and the family life and all the norms that make sense of that, is something that isn't uniquely Catholic, isn't uniquely sort of theistic. It stretches all the way back to people and to cultures with no connection whatsoever with Judaism or Christianity, ancient Greece, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Plutarch, Musonius, often people who held this exact, very similar views to this in highly homoerotic cultures where gay lifestyle was celebrated very prominently. So the idea that this view is animated because of animus or hatred of homosexuals is not the case. And as I said in the beginning of my talk, this emotional union view animates and sort of informs many people who are engaged in current relationships now.